You know what's wild? We've been told that the government restricted self-reliance skills to control us, to make us dependent, to strip away our freedom. That's the story everyone repeats. But the actual truth is far stranger, far more complicated, and honestly, way more interesting than a simple villain narrative. Because the real reason so many of our grandparents' survival skills became illegal isn't about control at all. It's about something nobody talks about. It's about liability, unintended consequences, and the way good intentions created impossible rules that nobody even remembers why they exist anymore. Let me take you back to 1954, a small town in Vermont. A man named Leonard Garrett owned 3 acres and lived the way people had lived for centuries. He had chickens, a vegetable garden, a rainwater collection system he'd built himself, and he preserved his own food. Nobody questioned it. It was normal. His kids were healthy. His neighbors didn't complain. But here's where the story gets interesting. Leonard's neighbor started a small dairy farm 3 miles away. That dairy farm grew. Then another one opened up. Then a fourth. And suddenly water became a commodity. The state started tracking water usage because the dairy industry was using enormous amounts for cooling, and Leonard's innocent little rainwater system, it became a problem. Not because it was wrong, but because once you start measuring water use, you have to regulate it. Once you regulate it, you need permits. Once you need permits, someone has to enforce it. And once you enforce it, nobody remembers that it was legal 5 years ago. This is the pattern that repeats across every skill on this list. Not a deliberate conspiracy to make you dependent. Something far more mundane. Progress. Industry. The unintended consequences of trying to solve one problem and accidentally creating 10 more. Let me walk you through the ones that really reveal this strange story. Number 17. Selling eggs from your backyard flock. This one seems absurd until you understand it. In the 1960s, there was a legitimate problem. Not all backyard flocks were safe. Some people kept their chickens in filthy conditions. Diseases spread. People got sick. Some got really sick. The USDA responded by creating food safety regulations. Good idea. Necessary idea. But those regulations were built for commercial operations, with thousands of birds, industrial equipment, and professional cleaning systems. Then bureaucrats copy and pasted those same rules onto the small farmer, selling 6 dozen eggs a week to neighbors. Now you need a commercial kitchen to process eggs from your own yard. A commercial kitchen costs $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. Your neighbor can't sell eggs anymore. Not because anyone got hurt, because the regulation was designed for a problem that didn't exist in someone's backyard, but the law didn't know the difference between a 2-bird operation and a 2,000-bird operation. Number 16. Building structures without permanent foundation on your own land. This one starts in Miami in 1926. A hurricane destroyed hundreds of homes. People rebuilt on stilts, temporary structures, mobile homes. Seemed reasonable at the time. But then insurance companies realized they couldn't accurately calculate risk on properties that might be moved. Banks couldn't finance them. Cities couldn't track property taxes properly. So building codes were standardized. Permanent foundations became mandatory. That made sense for dense urban areas where 8 structures sit on one city block. But the same rule got applied to a family with 500 acres of forest in West Virginia, where a temporary structure would literally never impact anyone. The regulation traveled down from the cities because that's how bureaucracy works. Rules move down. They don't move back up. Number 15. Processing and selling homemade preserves and jams. Another food safety story. This time from the 1970s. Industrial food processing had a few incidents. Botulism cases. Some deaths. Completely legitimate concern. The FDA created canning safety guidelines. Necessary. But then they banned home processing from being sold commercially. And here's the unintended consequence nobody talks about. The knowledge died. My grandmother made jam. She understood pH levels, sterilization temperatures, processing times. She knew what she was doing. But if she can't sell it, her daughter doesn't learn it properly. The knowledge becomes a hobby instead of a skill. 2 generations later, nobody knows how to do it anymore. The regulation was so effective at killing the commercial side that it also killed the cultural transmission of the skill itself. Number 14. Harvesting timber from your own wooded property without a licensed forester. This one is different because it actually did come from a real concern about clear cutting and erosion. Fair point. Unmanaged logging does damage river systems and soil stability. But the regulation that emerged required a licensed forester to sign off on any timber harvest, even on your own land, even if you're just cutting dead trees for firewood. Now you have to pay someone a few $100s to walk your property and approve what you were going to do anyway. The regulation was designed to prevent industrial-scale damage, but it got applied to a homeowner with 10 acres who wants winter fuel. Number 13. Digging a well on your property without a state-licensed well contractor. Here's the origin story. In the 1980s, groundwater contamination was discovered in several states. Industrial chemicals were leaking into aquifers. Legitimate crisis. So states required licensing for well drilling to prevent contamination. But the regulations became absurdly strict. A family can't dig a simple shallow well even if they're pulling water from 50 feet down, away from any contamination risk. They have to hire a contractor who costs thousands. And here's the real twist. Many of these licensed contractors are the same people who caused the original problem. They're the chemical manufacturers, the industrial operators, now selling you the solution. The regulation created a monopoly on the thing it was supposedly protecting. Number 12. Keeping bees without registering with the state. The reasoning here is fascinating. Honeybees can carry diseases. Africanized bees have been spreading north from South America. Property owners need to know if their neighbor has hives. Again, not unreasonable, but the registration process varies wildly by state. Some states charge $50 and require a simple form. Others charge $300 and require you to pass an exam. In some states, you need to report every single hive location. And the weird part? The regulations keep getting stricter even though wild bee populations are crashing. The law was designed to manage an invasive species problem, but it's also making it harder for people to keep the native-friendly backyard colonies that might actually help fix the problem. Number 11. Foraging mushrooms on public land. This one breaks my heart, because mushrooms are a perfect example of the unintended consequences problem. Mushroom hunting was traditional in dozens of cultures. Native peoples knew which species were safe. Appalachian families had centuries of knowledge. Then commercial harvesters started stripping forests bare, selling morel mushrooms for hundreds of dollars a pound. So states cracked down. Many banned wild mushroom collection entirely. Some required permits and daily limits. But here's what happened. Instead of killing the commercial side, the restrictions just made it illegal. Now people harvest mushrooms illegally in the dark. They don't report what they find, and the state has no data on population levels. The people who know the difference between a safe mushroom and a poisonous one are already gone. The regulation solved nothing. It just pushed the knowledge underground. Number 10. Raising livestock without state permits. This one has a cleaner origin story. Factory farming created genuine animal welfare and public health concerns, so states regulated livestock operations. Totally fair. But the permits and inspections became so expensive that small farmers couldn't compete. A family with 3 goats now needs the same permits as a 3,000-goat commercial operation, so they stop raising goats. The regulation was supposed to protect animal welfare, but it actually accelerated the consolidation of farming into industrial operations where conditions are often worse. Number 9. Teaching your kids survival skills on public land. This one is recent and genuinely bizarre. Boy Scout troops used to camp and practice skills on public forests with minimal permits. Now many require special permits. Some charge fees. A few have banned youth groups entirely. The reasoning is liability. If a kid gets hurt, who's responsible? The state? The organization? The landowner? It's a genuine legal gray area. So the simplest solution became restricted access. And now kids don't learn to build fires, identify plants, or navigate without GPS. Number 8. Collecting rainwater. This one's my favorite because it shows how one state's solution becomes another state's problem. Colorado started tracking rainwater because of water rights disputes between farmers and cities. Made sense in an arid region, but then other states copied the rule without the context. Now in some places, you can't collect rainwater from your own roof without a permit. It violates water rights laws. The original problem was about large-scale agricultural claims and interstate water compacts, but the regulation got written so broadly that it applies to everyone. A family in Georgia collecting rain in a barrel is technically breaking the law, even though Georgia has abundant water. Number 7. Making your own soap or preserves to give as gifts. This one is insane because it's technically food manufacturing. You made something edible. Even if you're not selling it, even if you're giving it to family or friends. Some states have tried to regulate homemade gifts. The liability concern is real, I guess. If someone gets sick from something you gave them, they could sue. So the logic says, ban it before it happens. But this regulation didn't really stick because it's almost impossible to enforce, and it offends people's sense of fairness. Yet the threat of it is enough to make people stop doing it. You can't legally give your friend homemade cookies in some jurisdictions. The regulation doesn't need to be enforced. Just knowing it exists changes behavior. Number 6. Hunting and foraging on state land during specific seasons is restricted more than ever. But here's what's weird. The same states that restrict hunting often lose money managing their wildlife programs. They get revenue from hunting licenses and tags. But the regulations are so strict and the tag costs are so high that fewer people hunt, so they have less money for wildlife management. So they raise tag prices more. It's a death spiral. The regulation was supposed to protect wildlife populations, and it did, in some cases. But it also created an incentive structure where the state makes more money if fewer people can participate. That's backwards. Number 5. Building a granny flat or accessory dwelling on your property. This is zoning law, not a survival skill, but it connects to the same pattern. Single-family zoning restrictions prevent you from building a second small home on your property. The original reasoning was neighborhood stability and property value protection, but the unintended consequence is that multi-generational housing became illegal. Your aging parents can't move into a small cottage on your land. Your adult kids can't afford to live near you. So families that used to stay connected, helping each other with childcare and elder care, got scattered. The regulation was supposed to protect neighborhood character, but it actually dismantled the extended family safety net that generations of humans relied on. Number 4. Making herbal remedies or teas without FDA approval. You can grow chamomile, you can dry it, but if you tell someone it helps with sleep, you've now made a drug claim. The FDA regulates that. This one actually did prevent some dangerous practices. Snake oil salesmen did prey on people. But the regulation became so broad that you can't legally tell someone that ginger helps with nausea, even though thousands of years of evidence suggests it does. The regulation was supposed to protect people from fraud. Instead, it created a monopoly on medical knowledge. Only pharmaceutical companies can make health claims. Regular people can't, even if their experience is true. Number 3. Composting on your property. Some municipalities have banned outdoor composting because of concerns about rodents and odors. Fair enough in dense urban areas, but the same rules apply to a family with 10 acres composting kitchen scraps. The regulation doesn't distinguish between context. It just says composting is banned. So people throw organic matter into landfills where it produces methane instead of turning it into soil amendment. The regulation was supposed to protect neighborhood quality of life, but it actually made environmental conditions worse. Number 2. Selling dairy products made from unpasteurized milk. Raw milk is the sensitive one because it actually can cause harm. There have been documented cases of people getting seriously sick from raw milk. So the regulation has some teeth. But in states that allow it with proper testing, no one's died. The risk is real but manageable with knowledge. The regulation became absolute though. Raw milk is banned across most of the country, even though the danger is overblown compared to other things we allow. The regulation was trying to protect health, which is a valid goal. But it also killed a connection to traditional food production that generations of humans lived with. Number 1. Living off-grid without permits and inspections. This is the grand finale because it encompasses all the patterns. Off-grid living means no electric meter, possibly a well instead of city water, maybe a septic system instead of sewer. Each of those is regulated separately. Each regulation was designed to protect something real: electrical safety, water quality, sanitation. But living off-grid shouldn't be a crime. And yet in many places, it's so heavily restricted that it's effectively impossible. A family that wants to be self-sufficient, to not consume fossil fuels, to not rely on infrastructure, faces permit fees, inspection costs, and ongoing compliance requirements that make the whole thing uneconomical. The regulation was supposed to protect safety, but it also protected the utility company's customer base. Is that a conspiracy? Not really. It's just how regulatory capture works. The people being regulated end up influencing the regulations. And this is the part nobody wants to talk about. These regulations didn't appear because some shadowy government wants to control you. They appeared because of specific problems, specific incidents, specific cases where things went wrong. But the solutions were written by people who didn't fully understand the downstream effects. Industrial dairy operations needed water regulation, so all water collection got regulated. Commercial logging caused erosion, so all timber harvest got regulated. Foodborne illness from industrial sources, so home food production got banned. Every single one of these started with a real problem. The tragedy isn't that the regulations exist. The tragedy is that nobody rewrites them. A law passes to solve a specific problem in a specific context. Then it stays on the books forever, getting applied in contexts it was never designed for. The regulation survives long after the problem it solved has either been fixed or transformed into something else. Your grandfather burned his leaves and nobody cared. That was fine. But then suburbs got dense. air quality got worse, asthma rates rose, and open burning got banned. That was the right call in 1995. But it's now 2026, and the same rule applies to a man on 50 acres who burns a brush pile he cut himself, downwind of nobody. The regulation didn't evolve, it just metastasized. What should happen is called sunsetting. Regulations should come with an expiration date. Every 10 years, the law stops existing unless someone actively renews it and proves it's still necessary. But that's not how government works. It's hard to pass a law. It's even harder to repeal one, even if nobody can remember why it exists anymore. So these regulations just accumulate, layer upon layer of rules, each one born from a good intention, each one designed to prevent a specific harm, but together creating a world where you can't do anything without permission. Now, here's where the real story gets interesting. Some people look at this situation and say the solution is deregulation. Just remove the rules, let people do whatever they want. And some of those rules should be removed, absolutely. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Some of those regulations exist because the alternative was worse. Factory farming is terrible, but small-scale farming almost certainly had higher rates of foodborne illness when there were no safety standards at all. Kids fell out of trees and drowned in rivers before regulations. Industrial pollution was genuinely catastrophic before the EPA existed. We didn't invent these problems, they were real. The regulations are imperfect solutions to real problems. What we need isn't deregulation or more regulation. We need intelligent regulation. Rules that distinguish between a small operation and an industrial one. Rules that get reviewed and updated. Rules that acknowledge that a single mother with 3 chickens is a different situation than a 3,000 chicken commercial operation, and they deserve different treatment. Rules that have safety teeth but don't become regulatory barriers to entry that only big corporations can afford. And here's what I want you to understand. This isn't about government versus freedom in some abstract sense. This is about the mechanisms by which regulations become disconnected from their original purpose. A regulation designed to prevent an industrial disaster gets applied to a family. A rule intended for a dense city gets applied to a homestead in the country. The rules travel down, but never travel back up. They accumulate, they get older, they get forgotten. And gradually, the world becomes more restricted. Not because anyone intended to restrict it, but because nobody actively chose to open it back up. If you want to understand this pattern better, I've put together a much deeper dive into the most important of these regulations and the origin stories behind them. You'll find it in the description and pinned comment, and it goes into the history of each one in detail, so you understand not just what happened, but why it happened. The bigger point is this. Self-reliance skills didn't become illegal because the government wants to enslave you. Self-reliance skills became illegal because of accumulated rules, each one reasonable in isolation, each one creating unintended consequences, and none of them being revisited or revised. If you want to reclaim some of that self-sufficiency, some of that independence, you don't just need skills, you need knowledge. You need to understand what's actually illegal in your specific location, what the history is, and sometimes what the gray area is. And I know that seems complicated. That's kind of the point. The complexity is the feature, not a bug. It keeps people from taking action. If you want the comprehensive guide to taking back some autonomy in your life, legally and practically, check the description for a resource that goes through the actual laws in different states and the ways people are finding workarounds. You can also find it in the pinned comment, and it has been updated for 2026 with the most current information and the states where these skills are still legal or becoming legal again. Thanks for watching. If this perspective on why these restrictions exist actually changed how you think about the problem, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we dig into a topic this deeply. The questions we ask about the world matter, and I'm grateful you're curious enough to stick with a nuanced story instead of just accepting the simple villain narrative we usually hear. See you in the next one.